just want to do two things. One, make sure we all kind of leave today with the understanding and principles of minimum viable product and MVP. And we'll go over some of that. And then I just wanted to reiterate how that should be impacting your pitch, because essentially half your slides are going to be what your MVP product is, and then essentially what feedback you got, and based on that feedback, what next steps you're going to take. So the best teams are going to be the ones that get some type of idea, super minimal prototype, even if it's sketch, out, and then get feedback from your stakeholders or from other people in the cybersecurity industry, and then potentially make another revision, or at least have plans on how to make the revision. So last class we had talked about, there was two co-founders. One had the idea of using satellite imagery for analytics for farmers, and the other one wanted to use drone technology. And we talked about, at the end of the day, the farmer doesn't care what you use, whether it's the drone or the satellite. They care about what the end product is, like essentially what is the dashboard, and is the dashboard actually meaningful? What the MVP would do in terms of building it, so where a lot of people, when they start entrepreneurship, they make the mistake is, well, then I'm just going to go out and build a dashboard, and I'm going to build the entire thing, and then I'll show the farmer. Minimum viable products are kind of like the exact opposite principle. It encourages you to build the smallest thing possible so that you can get feedback from real users. And the quicker you can make that feedback loop, the quicker you're going to iterate your product until you actually find something called product market fit. Where people make mistakes is they invest 6 months to a year to 2 years, invest thousands, even millions of dollars into their idea to launch it, only to find out, oops, it didn't work. And I've done that, like as a startup founder for my software. Like I make way too long iterations before I realize, like, yep, that did work or didn't work. So let's go back to the farmer example. Like on the dashboard, you could just literally, like in terms of this competition, you could mock out what a dashboard could be like, right? And it doesn't have to be real data. It could be a static screenshot, or it could be pieced together with something like Tableau or some type of data analytics that's already available. And you're essentially just manipulating it to look like, this is what it would look like. Like, what do you think? What would you want to know? Like, what other data? Like, what's useful? What's not useful? And if you can get to that stage during this competition where you're giving something, whether it's paper or a digital product, to someone and saying, here's the plans, or essentially here's the layout, what do you think? And then they can give you feedback on what's good, what's bad, what they would change, then you can come back. That's exactly what this competition's looking for. So a couple examples of companies that have done this before. And I'm going to give just different examples of industries, just so you kind of get the concept of like an MVP, because sometimes like we feel an MVP is like super ugly. But if I was looking to launch a restaurant, like this size is going to cost me, $1 million of investment to lease the space, to get all the furniture, etc. So JDogs is like the prime example of how it's done, like just bootstrapping it, doing it without funding. So JDogs was a hot dog stand outside of BYU, became super popular because they had some like cool inventive way of cooking the hot dog or whatever. But he took this little shack that probably cost like 10 grand and eventually turned it into a franchise company of like five or six different locations. But his point was like, he tested the product and made sure like, yeah, it was actually good. And we have lines, and we have so many lines that we actually need to start expanding. Another example, let's fast forward back here. So Zappos. So like 20 years ago, when Amazon was just getting popular, Zappos came along, and they essentially were the Amazon for shoes. Okay, so think of all the technological skills that would be needed to build essentially the Amazon for shoes. So not only on the tech side would you need that, but on the just the product side, how many shoes you would need. So mentally, just think to yourself like, okay, if I was going to launch Zappos and I'm supposedly like the Amazon of shoes, how many pair of shoes would I need to have in the inventory to make it worthwhile? Right? And then out of those pairs, how many sizes would I need to have? Right? Because if someone came and Kara buys size 5, and then there's no more 5, no one's going to use your site because you have no stock available. So instead of investing millions and millions and millions of dollars in Zappos, the founder of Zappos actually started by going to boutique stores in New York City and taking pictures of shoes that were just on the shelf. And then he'd take those pictures and upload them onto his site. And if someone bought, guess what he did? He'd literally walk down to the boutique and buy the shoes. And then he'd mark, on the website was marked up a little bit more, and he'd ship them the shoes. And is that a scalable way? No. Like, is that how we envision the entire business? No. But was that a super easy way to test whether he was actually improving the status quo? Yes. So that's the last thing I want to leave with tonight is, so in terms of like what an actual MVP is, it's the most minimum thing you can do to essentially deliver to someone where they can touch it or feel it, and they're going to tell you whether or not like you're actually improving the current status quo. Most people, unfortunately, don't do it this way. So if you think of the top here, the thumbs down, it's the exact opposite way to build a business, which is everyone has the dream. Like right now, whether it's cybersecurity or something else, we all have like this amazing car that we want to build, like this dream of here's what my business is going to be like. I'm gonna have the billboards. I'll have my high-rise building with my name on it. Okay, so you can envision that all you want, but most people, what they do is they don't launch anything until they think they've actually built the entire car. So, I'm not telling you when I launch until I perfect the app and I do this and I do this and I do this. So you continue to add things to your business, but in terms of the status quo, you actually don't improve anything until you get to launch day. And the problem with this is this costs so much time and so much money, and it's almost like 99% guaranteed that when you launch, something was wrong. There was some type of assumption. You either thought one customer was going to like it and they didn't, or they'd love this feature and they don't, or you just completely missed it altogether. So what we're teaching you is, in terms of MVP, is, yeah, eventually we want to build a car, but today we're trying to focus on building a scooter. So if the goal is to move faster, then the car is obviously the king, right? In this example, but we're not asking you to build a car in a week. We're just saying, can you build something, or can you show something that would improve the status quo just by a little bit? Or can you prove it out? Can you at least validate it just by a little bit? And so let me give you two more examples of companies that did this. So we had an entrepreneur in venture college about 7-8 years ago that she had the idea of doing a service trip to Belize. And she would take students down there, and instead of just hanging out at the beach, they would actually do service projects and help with these schools and all that. And so think about it. If you were going to launch that business, you would need your insurance. You need to file the business. You would need to buy your plane tickets, have partnerships in Belize, all that stuff, right? Before you'd even advertise. That's the norm. In venture college, we teach the opposite. Throw something out there as minimal and cheap as possible to see if there's interest. And if there's interest, then double down and quickly build the business. So she went to two schools. I think it was Bishop Kelly and another one. And she pitched in front of parents and said, hey, we're doing this trip. Like, she kind of like sold it as if it was already going to happen. We're doing this trip and it's going to be 2 weeks down in Belize. Your kids are going to blah, 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 blah. And she handed a flyer, and the flyer just asked for a deposit. So it wasn't even like a raise your hands if you're interested. It was, if you're interested, put some dollars down. It was like a $500 deposit. Well, within like 2 weeks, you had, I think, close to 20 kids, 15, 20 kids that had signed up. That's a prime example. Like with $20 of printing off copies and in 2 talks, she was able to validate whether people were actually like interested in her idea. And then she had to hit the boosters and say, okay, let's go ahead and build it, right? Let's hurry up and get the plane tickets. And that's a mad race, but that's actually an easier one if you already know you have success. The last one, so Norton and I were actually coworkers during this time period. So he actually remembers these days. So in my early startup days, we eventually got to a point with my product where we were gathering all reviews into one spot. So if I was a restaurant, it'd be like Yelp, TripAdvisor, Google. And so that was our initial product, but we got quick feedback that people wanted to respond back to these reviews. And so I was sick. At this point, I had spent like 2 or 3 years guessing the wrong thing and wasting a bunch of dollars and time. And so it was the first time I was like, screw it. Like, we actually need to like test this with an MVP and not build the whole thing. So Norton, do you remember what we did? It's been a while. If you don't, it's okay.
I don't. I forgot.
That's okay. That's okay. So
I think we manually replied to those reviews for them,
that's
if I remember
exactly
correctly.
that's exactly right. So here's what we did. We put like on our site, when there was a review, there was a reply button, and when they hit reply on the app, it looked like they went ahead and just posted it. And in theory, our system would have been connected to all the APIs, to all these websites, and this and that. But we didn't want to invest 6 months of dev time, so we told the team, okay, here's what's going to happen. When they hit reply, it's going to send an email to us, and we're manually going to go onto Google and Yelp and TripAdvisor. We're going to post the response on their behalf. It's the most like ghetto, non-scalable software thing ever. But in a week to 2 weeks, we found out that there was enough usage that it was worth building out the automation, because it kept us so busy where we're like, okay, actually, let's automate this because we're wasting a lot of time posting reviews. And so it was like one of the first times I finally got that concept of like the MVP should not be scalable. It's just a manual kind of dirty test to see, are you improving the status quo? But the last thing I'll mention on that is we actually did improve the status quo. Like the businesses, even though it was longer to respond than, if we had automated it, we made it more simple for them, hence them actually using it. And even though it was not scalable, it was better than what they were doing before, which was manually themselves going out to all the sites. So that really taught me the principle of all you have to do is improve what today is and see if you actually make a difference. Okay, last thing, let's transition to the pitch that's coming up. I want to do just a high level overview. This template here is a rough template. You can change the colors, you can change the order. This is the general order, but you can fluctuate it if needs be. So remember the first slide, just essentially just team name and some type of tagline. So I'm Ryan, we help cybersecurity for small businesses, or whatever it might be. Here, you're just explaining what the actual problem is. Highly encourage you to make, and we'll go in this next class, we'll actually show you, I'll go into like essentially how to like good looking slides, so it's not super cluttered. But for today, just explain to me what the problem is right now. And most importantly, like tell me why it's still a problem. Like why hasn't somebody solved it already? Or if there's solutions out there, why do those solutions still fall short? Okay. All right, so a prime example, I know like 3 of you are working on software for lawyers, okay, or for like law documents. There's got to be stuff out there already. There's got to be some. So my question is like, what's out there? Why is that not sufficient enough? Like, where is it falling short? Like, don't act like competition doesn't exist. You want to call to attention there's competition, and then say, but this is why it's still failing. Okay, next is going to be your service and product. This is more of the car vision. So what we talked about today, scooter versus car, you can sell me more of the car. Like long-term, this is what we think our product or service would be. And then you're just telling me how your product or service would actually solve the problem. Now we're talking about what we talked about today, the MVP. So this is where you're translating like, okay, you told me about the car, but what are you going to build first to like do proof of concept? So what's the smallest thing that you could actually build or have built or have designed? So if you did a mock-up or a prototype, this is where you're going to show it off. This is where you're going to show me the designs or your thoughts or whatever it might be. Next slide is essentially what feedback did you get from the MVP? So on this one, you're just explaining essentially what the feedback was, and then that just rolls into like, okay, what are next steps? So based on that feedback, if you were to continue on with this idea, what are the next steps you're going to do to actually make this more viable or get to launch ready stage, whatever it might be? A brief description of your team and maybe like why you're the team to execute it. This is really the bridge of what this connects. If you're telling me what the next steps are, you should tell me like why as a judge, I should believe that your team can actually execute on this. So if like Norton came to me and said, well, the next steps are to build a rocket to Mars and compete with Elon Musk, then I'm going to say, Norton, great, awesome idea, but how in the world are you going to do that? Okay, so that slide should be able to answer that. So if you're thinking it's some massive car dream that's not feasible, it's going to come back to bite you on the team where they're going to say like, you're probably not the person to execute it. So find things that you feel comfortable executing yourself. And then the last thing is you'll just finish with questions or thank you, but eventually it'll roll into a 4-minute question and answer session.